This weekend, the largest single gathering of 2020 Democratic presidential candidates yet. A total of 14 in all hit the stage for the California Democratic Party convention to speak before a crowd that is part of the most engaged activist base that the party has to offer. And so with that in mind, perhaps it wasn't much of a surprise when former Maryland Congressman John Delaney got booed for calling Medicare for all bad policy.
But we need, as Democrats, to build an economy that works. But it's got to be with smart policies. Medicare for all may sound good, but it's actually not good policy, nor is it good politics. I'm telling you.
Those boos went on for a full minute. Then there was former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who not only criticized Medicare for all, but also the Green New Deal and socialism, all in a matter of minutes.
If we want to beat Donald Trump and achieve big progressive goals, socialism is not the answer. I was reelected in a purple state in 2014, one of the worst years for Democrats in a quarter century. We shouldn't try to achieve universal coverage by removing private insurance from over 150 million Americans. We should not try to tackle climate change by guaranteeing every American a government job. Hold on. As the Democratic Party, we have to create a vision for this country.
And John Hickenlooper, 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, former governor of Colorado, joins me now. Governor, was that what you were expected, or was that what you were seeking in that moment?
No, we were aware that we might get some boos. Certainly, I wasn't planning on it.
Let me ask you this. It was interesting. So you talked about that, about socialism, and then you talked about yourself, your sort of political bona fides, right, that you'd been elected in 2014, a tough year for Democrats in a purple state. When you talk about these issues, do you see this in sort of practical terms that the electorate isn't there with us, or in substantive terms, meaning that these are just bad ideas?
No. I'm running for president because I think this country is in a national crisis of division, and Trump is fueling it, and it's taking the country backwards. But socialism isn't the answer. What we did in Colorado, we got nonprofits and business, we got Democrats and Republicans to get to almost universal health care coverage. We became the #1 economy in the country, and we beat the NRA with some tough new gun laws. Right? As a governor, but also as a small business person, I brought people together to get the big progressive things done that people said couldn't be done.
I guess when people talk about bringing people together, right, the question I always ask is, like, what sort of magic do you have, or what trick have you figured out that everyone else hasn't, right? Barack Obama, I think everyone agrees, is, whether they liked him substantively or not, one of the most talented politicians in recent memory, had a huge mandate, had huge majorities, right? And Mitch McConnell basically did everything he could to obstruct him. Like, in what universe does John Hickenlooper not encounter the same problem?
Well, I think that in part it's who I am. I'm probably the one person running for president that never ran for student council in high school or college.
Wait a second. Do you really think, like, your personality is such that Mitch McConnell is going to bring stuff up to a vote because of who you are?
No. Mitch McConnell is the exception. And when we took on the NRA and they wouldn't compromise...
He's a powerful exception. He controls one of the 2 legislative branches of the United States Congress.
I understand that. And you certainly have to go talk to him just so that the people that follow him and respect him wouldn't feel diminished. But in the end, you've got to do what you've got to do to get stuff done. And I think, both as a small business person, I spent 17 years as an entrepreneur and a small business person, you learn different skills of negotiation, and you build relationships in ways that other people don't. Look at Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. They hated each other at first, right? They were at each other's throats, and yet in the end, over a period of time, they came to know each other and they got big things done.
Right, but Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, and my colleague in the hour previous wrote a whole book about this. It's a very good book. I'd recommend. It's just a different political era, right? The polarization of the 2 parties hasn't settled in. You still got Southern Democrats who are sort of traditionally conservative. There's all sorts of structural things in 30 years that have changed, and I think the argument that people on the other side of this sort of debate have, right, is that if you go into these structurally polarized politics thinking with a 1983 model, you're going to get the floor wiped with you.
I'm not using that model. I'm using the model of human nature. And when I ran for mayor in 2003, the suburban mayors were mostly Republicans, and they hated the city of Denver. If you look at at what we got done, we got all 34 mayors to unanimously support a tax increase to build the largest transit initiative in modern American history, and we did it collaboratively. You fly into DIA now,
right,
our airport, and you'll take a train downtown to Union Station. You'll see one of the national models of urban revitalization. That was through collaborative effort, and it didn't just happen overnight. My predecessor hated the mayor of the largest suburb, Aurora, and Aurora hated Denver. In the end, we got people to work together, and that's how, when I got elected governor, I was the first Denver mayor in 120 years to get elected governor of Colorado. That should say something.
I want to ask you one more question about your record, because you did mention the Green New Deal and you've talked about climate as well. One of the things that happened while you were governor of Colorado is that fossil fuel extraction went up enormously. It was a boon financially to many of the fossil fuel companies, but I think you basically saw from 2.7 million barrels up to 14 million barrels. I know a lot of that was fracking. When you look at that chart, when people who are really concerned about the climate crisis and say we need to get to net zero by 2050, look at that chart. Isn't that chart moving exactly in the opposite direction?
You know, what we did in Colorado, which had never been done in any other state, was we got the oil and gas industry to sit down with the environmental community. And if you look at it, we were the first state where they got methane regulations. Methane is 25 to 40 times worse for the climate than CO2. And in the end, the oil and gas industry agreed to pay $60 million a year. And it's the equivalent of removing 320,000 automobiles a year from the roads. That no one had ever done that, not in this country. And as far as I can tell, no other government had done that. And yet, if we're going to deal with climate change, we've got to address methane, and we've got to get everybody at the table and figure out some compromises, or else we're just yelling at each other.
All right. John Hickenlooper, who is the governor of Colorado, 2020 presidential Democratic candidate. Thanks so much for making time.
You bet.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.